Welcome to Philosophy from the FrontLine. This podcast explores the intersection of philosophy, entrepreneurship, and veteran transition. Join us as we delve into the minds of successful entrepreneurs who have made the journey from military service into small business ownership. Our guests will share their insights, experience, and unique perspectives on life, business, and the world around us. Through deep conversations and thought-provoking discussions, we hope to inspire and empower our listeners to tackle their own challenges and achieve their dreams. So sit back, relax, and get ready to explore the world of entrepreneurship from a veteran's point of view. This is Philosophy from the FrontLine, and we'll see you on the high ground. So today we've got Brian Trainor on the line. He's going to tell us his transition story, which is pretty unique. And I got a little bit of background on him, but this is going to be a great conversation to share with you guys. And without further ado, Brian, if you don't mind, just give us your introduction. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And just as a disclaimer, I am at my clinic today, and they are doing some work on the roof. We're going solar. So if you hear, like you said, we're going to keep this organic. You may hear some drills. I'm not in a war zone. I'm at my clinic in Hillcrest, California, San Diego. But yeah, I'm Dr. Brian Trainor. I'm a newly graduated naturopathic doctor, licensed and practicing now. Class of 2013, West Point grad. My story, really starts at West Point and then after. I was a recruited runner and All-American triathlete, switched over to the triathlon team, raced for the All-Army team. But shortly after graduation, I was hit by a car and fractured my femur. I had a head injury through some military training at the time. Both injuries on their own may not have been that significant, but the compound effect led to a number of other health issues, including a diagnosis of Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. I went from perfectly healthy, top physical graduate of my class to in the hospital having 30 bloody bowel movements a day, anemic, weak, and just struggling to get from my bed to the bathroom. And so it was a unique set of circumstances that led to all that. But bottom line, it made me start learning a lot more about health and about how the gut and the brain work together, how our physical body and our mental and emotional bodies all work together. So anyway, that's kind of what happened. Still fought through it, tried to stay in for about 3.5 years before I was medically discharged in 2016. And then, I'm happy to tell the rest of my story of kind of what happened and how I ended up as a hippie naturopathic doctor from a more conservative West Point military background. But excited to dive into all that. That's kind of the background of who I am.
That's super impressive, man. Like I will tell you that one of the hardest things is recovering from an injury. And I think that's a huge part of being a veteran. And most people just don't realize that, like, being a veteran is pain. Like, if you make it through a career in the military, whether it be a short one or a long one, there's going to be some nagging kind of injuries that are going to stick with you. And then it's how do you do that pain management in a successful way to prevent all the underlying causes or exacerbated conditions that can come from that. So I think your insights are going to be valuable from that perspective, as well as giving people some alternative means of taking care of themselves, vice, the standard medical practice or over medication sometimes that the VA or some other medical treatment would recommend. So I think this is going to be super, super cool. And so you kind of alluded to your injury, but do you have a little bit more specifics? Like, was it tied to your training, or was it just a random occurrence, or how did that really happen?
So good question. The leg injury, again, wasn't necessarily the direct cause from a conventional standpoint of my GI condition, gastrointestinal. So my it could be considered separate, but I went from, like I said, fully healthy to in a hospital with a broken leg. And so the car accident was actually while training Team Red, White, and Blue, which is a great nonprofit that serves veterans. Two of my professors at West Point were the founders, Dr. Mike Irwin, Major Irwin, and Lou Nemec. I know Mike's out now. I'm not sure where Major Colonel Nemec is at this point, but they both were mentors of mine. They were amazing. They convinced me to take on this idea of riding my bike from upstate New York, where I'm from, down to Key West, Florida, to raise awareness for veteran suicide and for Team RWD during my grad leave. And I thought that was a great idea. Spending 30 days on the road before starting my Army career. So it was actually a few days before that I was hit by a car while cycling in my hometown of upstate New York, about 2 miles from my house. So that changed my grad leave plans drastically. And but looking back, I am somewhat thankful. I got to spend a lot more time with my family. There was a lot of silver linings. But what it led to was that I showed up to Officer Basic as an engineer officer with a broken leg, and going from like I was saying, like from this top physical student and person to being told I'm useless because I'm broken was a unique, I would say, mental and emotional challenge, especially because during Officer Basic, I was trying out to be an engineer diver, which was, there's a few selected every year out of our officer group that go engineers. So going from the certainty of like, this is what I'm doing with my career, to all this uncertainty and having to basically plead my case to stay in the course I was in with, colonels and things like that as a young lieutenant was an interesting transition, for sure.
Yeah, I can see how that would be pretty daunting, because like most of us aren't even armed enough to like figure out where the chow hall is, let alone, fight for a military career as a second lieutenant, and regardless, and I've said this before, I haven't said it on this podcast at all, but I used to say this all the time, and nothing that the military trains you for prepares you for that next challenge, right? So you could have been the most physically, academically sound, militarily sound person coming out of the academy, but that change in condition that was outside of the normal bell curve for everyone else creates an opportunity that like is a very heavy weight. And my hat's off to you, and that'll kind of transition into our next question, which is what are you doing now? But my hat's off to you just for persevering through that, because, if I jump back in the Wayback Machine when I was, that young captain, and if I saw a broken second lieutenant, I think I probably would have been part of the problem as well. And I think we all kind of had that inherent piece of our nature, particularly in combat arms organizations, because they're a little bit more high pace and high tempo. And you're looking, now you can say like, hey, I'm looking at the ability to accomplish my mission, but probably before it was just me being a jerk, right? And I think, it comes with age and wisdom, as being able to kind of see, the difference between, wanting somebody to be prepared and ready for the mission versus just being, a jackass for no apparent reason. But I think there's kind of a balance between both of those. But it sounds like you had to persevere through, some extra curricular activities that are above and beyond the normal activity of a second lieutenant trying to make it through basic. So that actually brings me to question number 3 on the Frontline 5 is, what are you doing now? And seeing that you are talking to us from a clinic, that means that you've probably done some things since your injury. So we'd definitely like to get a little bit more insight on those.
Absolutely. Well, and I totally agree with everything you said. I think the biggest realization from my sicknesses and my injuries have been that everyone's dealing with something. It could be, and it's relative. It definitely is not, well, my injury is worse than this person's or this or that. I'm learning that as a doctor, but also as a patient, that and sometimes sharing the things we're dealing with, or what some people might call our weaknesses, does open a unique conversation that otherwise wouldn't occur. So yeah, basically what happened was I did try to hide it. I was taught that, I had fractured my elbow in a cycling accident at school. I had some other injuries. But as long as I worked harder, I always overcame them and was sometimes better off for them. And so with this diagnosis of ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, I was told, actually it was during the government shutdown of 2013. So it was this crazy time where there wasn't a gastrointestinal specialist on base at Fort Leonard Wood. I ended up at this weird hospital an hour away. I convinced a fellow student to drive me. And it all ended up not in my military record. So I thought that was a good thing. I'm like, good, I'm going to be able to save my career. But the doctor said some interesting words to me after he did a colonoscopy to look at the damage. And he's like, look, you have this autoimmune condition with no known cause, no known cure, and there's only some medication, but it may not work. And I was like, okay, so you're telling me there's nothing I can do? Like I can't research more, learn more, do more. And his answer was no. I was like, what about nutrition? Does diet matter? He's like, no, I don't, it doesn't really seem to matter. And I was like, that's mind blowing to me because my nutrition, my diet has always mattered as an athlete. So, but I went from like into a pretty deep hole there of like finally facing something, not even finally, but at age 22, facing something that I was told there was nothing I could do to overcome it. And so that I carried into my Army career. I went on some immunosuppressive medications. They worked short term. I got to take over a platoon, which was awesome as part of a brigade combat team, and went to NTC twice and loved the experiences. Didn't deploy in that time. But in some ways, I'm thankful because after a second NTC rotation, I flared up pretty bad to the point that I was, again, having about 30 bloody bowel movements a day. Thankfully, a doctor with first group up there, I went up to Fort Lewis after Letterwood. And I love Fort Lewis. I loved it up there. And I'm really grateful for some of the training opportunities I had. I was selected to run on the Fort Lewis Army 10-miler team, even with all this going on. Somehow I was trying to race and different things. I got pulled from the starting line of one of the all-Army triathlon teams. The 10-miler team, we had this opportunity to do this extra training with at the Special Forces medical facility to do all this cool exercise physiology testing. I got on the treadmill one day and my resting heart rate was 120. And I, was a platoon leader at the time. I was trying to tough through it, but the head doctor, Dr. Haight, actually asked me, he's like, are you on like a bunch of caffeine or something? And I'm like, no, but I've been moving out blood a little bit. It's fine. No big deal. He's like, no, that's a big deal. Like so he was the first one that he's like, look, you need to go to the hospital. Like I'm taking you over. I actually needed like a blood transfusion. I had lost so much blood. I was anemic. They didn't have to do emergency surgery, but that was an option to take out my whole large intestine just because I had, been toughing through it as I thought we were supposed to do in the military. So, I'm pretty now, aware of my limits. So anyway, long answer short, that's kind of what led me to that first hospitalization is when technically the med board was initiated. This was 2014, 15. And, going from that was a tougher realization, like, hey, like I'm not going to be able to tough through this and stay in my job. My unit found out. And what I'm very grateful for is my battalion commander at the time looked at my OER and saw, he's like, hey, you were a kinesiology major at West Point. That's something to do with medical, right? And I was like, well, we take some of the prereqs for med school, but yeah, sure. And he was like, well, I'm going to have to pull you out of being a platoon leader, but we don't have a medical service officer. We have 30 medics that we don't have anyone to really lead them. And we also have no one communicating with the brigade of like our medical readiness and all that. So my last year in the Army, instead of getting sent to like a warrior transition unit or something like that, he actually allowed me to be, my final OER was written as a med service officer. And I got to, meet all kinds of doctors and work with the hospital staff. And that is what led me to become interested in medical school. And so in that process, I've met some amazing doctors there up at Madigan and in my job. And so I took a few classes at night to become current on my prereqs. I started studying for the MCAT. And as I did transition out medically, I took the MCAT 2 days after a hospitalization. It was a crazy period of my life where I still wasn't fully healthy, but I was starting to learn more and more about these autoimmune conditions, inflammatory nature of it. But I was still pretty convinced of going a more conventional medical route. I was going to go to either MD or EO school. And that was my focus. The idea of going to conventional or traditional medical school and then learning nutrition and learning all these other modalities that I now practice. And that was my main goal, but I actually moved down here to San Diego as I got out of the military. And I know this is a long answer, but it was a big period.
It's fine.
I moved to San Diego in part to get a new biologic treatment for ulcerative colitis that was offered here. I could get it approved through Balboa Hospital here, but I couldn't get it at Madigan as a medical retiree. Or just some logistical stuff. So I came down here with that in mind, but I actually met my now clinic. My mom's really into holistic medicine, natural medicine. And so she came to visit. She's like, let's go check out this naturopathic medical school. I was like, what is that? And so she brought me over. It sounded really cool. We went to like an open house and found out they had a clinic where you can see students and head doctors there. And I went in and I met this doctor who, her daughter had Crohn's disease and it was completely healed. And oddly enough, her daughter was now in medical school. So I went from being told there was nothing I could do, I just had to take some medications, hope that we find a cure someday, to basically finding out that there were natural treatments that were actually proven and well researched for ulcerative colitis, and that there was a way ahead. And so that was 2016, and I decided to stay and go to that school. And it's a 4-year degree. So I started in 2016, just graduated here in June, and took my board exams in August, got my NPI, or National Provider Identifier, got my DEA license to prescribe, and I'm now doing my residency at a clinic here called the Center for Health and Wellbeing. And it's unique in that we have medical doctors, naturopathic doctors like myself, chiropractors, acupuncturists, mental health providers, all working together in an insurance model to provide excellent care for really anyone that walks in. But I love it here because my desk, I sit next to an MD, a nurse practitioner, another naturopathic doctor, and get to learn from all these different backgrounds and credentialing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Now, my main question is, can you come to Fort Bragg? If I realize that there's a large population of veterans and active duty soldiers that could probably use a similar skill set. I think one of the things that I've learned over time as well is the effects of being able to do, non-invasive or naturopathic healing type techniques. My wife had really bad back pain, so I'm going to throw her under the bus for a little bit. And our PA at 6th RTB had taken dry needling and acupuncture classes. And so he's like, yeah, come in, lay on the table, we'll fix you up. And boom, like almost overnight, she's better. And of course, like you see it quite a bit around Fort Bragg because they do have the acupuncturists. So you see the ear tags of folks running around with the wellness tags from the acupuncturist, and at first you're like, I don't know if that works. But then when you start to see the success over time and people are pain free and they're not using, opioids or some other type of painkillers, it's amazing what the human body can do when nudged in the right direction rather than pushed off of a cliff by using some type of narcotic. So I find your whole story, even though it was kind of, you said it was kind of long, but it's very, very interesting. And that kind of triggers some things in my head that makes me think it's like, man, like, two things, one, again, to your credit, like I appreciate you coming on, number one, and number two, it's like for you to be able to tell this story with confidence is going to help a lot of people that get stuck, because there's a lot of veterans that when adversity strikes them, they curl up in a ball and tie up in the corner, and they don't attack the life as well as they should. And it goes back to, your previous mentioning of Team Red, White, and Blue and Stop Veteran Suicide and things like that, is when people feel like they have no options, that becomes an option. So you took a situation that literally could have been fatal in some cases, whether that be your physical condition or your mental condition, and you turn it into something very, very positive. So again, hats off to you for one, sharing your story, and I appreciate it. But the other part of it is not being a statistic, right? Because all too often veterans, we fall into those same situations, just like you tried to suck it up, for the early part of your career with all these injuries, rather than taking the step back. The best person in the room is the guy that can take the step back and say, hey, look, something's not working for me. I'm hurt, I'm in pain, how do I get this fixed? And we're hardwired, whether that starts at West Point or in the basic course or whatever it is, to nope, I'm just going to push through it because it's the difference between playing hurt or playing with pain. And sometimes we really don't know the difference, until something catastrophic happens. So again, I really appreciate you giving us those insights. And then it kind of rolls into question number 4. We kind of covered 4 and 5. So like, what was your hardest part about coming out of the military? And it seems like, my opinion is you trying to, recover your health, but I'm sure that there's probably some more things that kind of stuck out as you now.
I would say that the model for one of my still challenges is, what is my role? How do I take the training that I got through the military and, that and I not feeling guilt around, hey, I didn't go to Afghanistan, I wasn't in Iraq, and knowing that my classmates are there, even right now. And I think that was as challenging as facing the physical challenges I was facing, because I'm like, oh, this is a small thing. One of my good friends, Chief Palm, he was up at Fort Lewis with me. He was shot down in Afghanistan. He was a 160th pilot. Like, I went and visited him at Walter Reed. Like, every single bone on the right side of his body was broken, and like my health. So it's easy to play the compare game. Like, oh, like I didn't, my injuries aren't the same. They weren't in combat. And so I would say to any veteran dealing with that, because I've unfortunately met too many like myself that have the guilt that they're not still in, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. I would just say there are so many ways to continue to serve. I think what you're doing, Rob, I think, what I do, I live with a friend who's on the SEAL teams over here, and he's actually a West Point grad. It would be a really interesting story. He is an interesting story, but I continue to give back. I go play ultimate frisbee with the guys on base. I just listen. I just listen to their stories. I try to act like an older brother. I work closely with another nonprofit called the Navigators. It's more of a faith-based group. With that said, I basically, like I said, I act like an older brother. I grew up with 3 sisters. I don't know what it's like to have a brother, but I do through the military. And so I get to be this nonpartisan, guy with a little bit of facial hair. Like, who is this guy? But, show up and just say, hey, like, I'm not in your command. I'm not, I just want to hear what's going on. And so I actually do a lot of work with young men that don't make it through buds out here. The first year I got here in 2016, there was about a 90% washout rate. And so it seemed like every other guy I would meet on base or in the community out here. Out here in San Diego, the military community is more intertwined, I would say, with the city of San Diego than I've seen some of the Army bases that are a little maybe further out on the outskirts. So I would just say to veterans, like, there's so many ways to give back. If you have any sort of feelings like I've had that I didn't do enough, well, one, there's plenty of work to be done, whether you're in uniform or not. And some of the other ways I'm doing that, I'm connected with the San Diego Veterans Coalition, which is an amazing organization that's trying to integrate the services provided in the community with what's already at the VA. And then on another level, the VA is advancing a program called the Whole Health Initiative. And so through that, veterans now should be able to get acupuncture, no questions asked, just like you shared about you and your wife. Like, if you go in and say, I'm having back pain, the model, the actual law for the CARA 2.0 Act, veterans should be offered acupuncture prior to or in conjunction with opioids. They should never be put on a medication without having been offered at least 10 sessions of acupuncture. They also say the same is true of chiropractic. I've seen it a little bit harder to get referred for that. But basically, yes, the answer is those services, if they're not provided at the local VA, the Mission Act should send you to someone in the community. And the whole health program hasn't taken root everywhere, but I would say it's on the right track. And then one more shout out to Fort Bragg. There is another group you may have heard of. It's Dr. Brian Stepanenko is down there at Fort Bragg, and he's working with a guy named Jeff Dardia, and they're doing they're basically providing functional medicine for special operators specifically. But I do think the work that they're doing through Task Force Dagger is going to lead the way to allow. So functional medicine is another way of saying what I do as a naturopathic doctor. It's the common training that myself, an MD, a nurse practitioner, or PA could take to kind of have the basic fundamental guidelines of this holistic approach to health. So I would say Institute for Functional Medicine, IFM, is advancing, doing some really cool things with doctors, active duty providers, PAs, MDs. So I guess what I'm saying is there's hope on both sides, both for veterans that, we can continue to give back and help others, but also within the two systems, there is hope. Even if it hasn't reached all of Fort Bragg or all of San Diego yet, there's people like me throughout the country working on this.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And what I will tell you is, again, back in the younger days when we were less mature, we would say, silly things to people about their service, right? And one of the things that I've come to the conclusion of is there's there's just different flavors of veterans, right? And that's the easiest way to look at it. Like, so you have the guys from the greatest generation. They got drafted, served in World War II, stayed for Korea, got out before Vietnam. You have the Vietnam era guys. And then you have folks that just served and something happened and their service is no different than anyone else's. And it's hard for me to, sit back and say, I understand, because I don't, because I did 5 deployments in a 20-year career. You know what I mean? But I can commiserate with you on some of those, hey, I can remember sitting out at NTC in the Dust Bowl, sucking down dirt as vehicles are driving by. It doesn't matter if you deploy to Afghanistan or not. A trip to the Dust Bowl at NTC sucks, period, right? And so I think there's still commonality there. And as veterans, as a community, we have to figure out how to find that common ground amongst ourselves. And maybe that common ground is, like you said, it's the mission, so we focus on helping other people rather than telling people's backstory. And I can tell you, vets can smell their own, right? Guys know when somebody's faking the funk about their service, and better to be honest and just tell people the truth. I'm like, yeah, man, like I got injured and I transitioned. I'll have more respect for you than if you said, like, yeah, I went to Afghanistan and I got blown up and then I found out later that you didn't, and I think that's part of the culture is, unfortunately with the livelihood of social media and showing the best parts of your life when that's not really the best part of your life, it makes it difficult to kind of have these honest discussions about where you are or what has happened to you. So, from my perspective, one veteran to another, hey, you're doing what you need to do, right? You're putting yourself out there to help somebody. And this conversation, when somebody listens in, they're going to have an insight and maybe they'll come and look you up and check out your facility, right? Or maybe you will get some follow-ups, phone calls, people will ask and just try and get on a healthier track. We were actually having this conversation this morning about, the ease of some medical doctors, and I won't say, who, but the ease of some medical organizations just to over-medicate, right? There's a reason why we had an opioid crisis in this country, and it's because, one, we're trying to push these medicines out as quickly as we can before the patent expires, and I have to sell it to make generics. And the other piece of it is we have an entire country, whether we like it or we don't, that is not made to suffer, right? We have the luxury of having access to medical treatment and things like that. And people take advantage of it so much so they become addicted to some of their treatments. And it's an unfortunate byproduct of having the healthcare system that we have. Guess what? If we had socialized medicine, it wouldn't be any better, but we're going to table that discussion. But being completely honest, like if people have free access to opioids, it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And I don't think people are really accounting for that because in the moment, all they hear is free, right? And I will tell you that, I think we all have to kind of take a step back and do those consistent assessments of who we are and where we're at, and I tell people all the time, even counselors get counseling. So I know some grizzled veterans that talk to their therapist once a week. You know what I mean? And it's like, I love those guys, and because they're honest, and these dudes are like some snake eaters, and they're the folks that, realize that there is a problem. Sometimes they find out a little too late because the powder keg exploded, or they find out just in time and they stave off that big major blow up that could be, financially, emotionally, or relationally damaging. So again, I appreciate, your honesty, and please do not feel guilty about, whether you went to Afghanistan or not. You know why? Because Robinson was in for 23 years and I got classmates that only went once and they're colonels, so to their credit, they have to look themselves in the mirror, right? And that's the thing is you can look yourself in the face and say, hey, I did the best that I could with what I had. That's a win. Right. And the only person that you have to be honest with is, the airborne ranger in the sky and yourself. So if you can, have faith in those two people and know that you did what you could, and I guarantee you're having just as much or more impact as you would in the uniform in the current profession that you're in right now. So really, I think we've hit just about everything as far as the Frontline 5. And this has been a great discussion. I'm blown away with your success. I mean, I know I had a couple of classmates that had to punch early as well, just because of medical conditions that they had while they're at the academy. And there's something about folks that happens to that become overwhelmingly successful. So I know that you're going to do great at your job. One, because you're willing to tell your story, but two, that drive is still there. Just because you're not, doing it off the back of a 113 or Bradley or Humvee or something, doesn't mean that you've lost that desire to serve. And you just basically you hung up one coat and put on another one. So from my perspective, again, and I'm talking a lot right now, but I just wanted to say thank you again, because your service matters, and your continued service still matters, right? And one of the best things I've ever heard a veteran say was it was last year at Normandy 7.5, and it came back in by word of mouth of another paratrooper, and they meet this World War II veteran, shake his hand like, "Hey, sir, thank you for the service," and the guy looks at you and he says, "You're worth it." And when I heard that, I was like, well, damn, man, like that makes me feel about this tall, so it makes us all kind of have to take a step back and just evaluate the perspective. So again, I appreciate everything that we have talked about. And I'm super, super interested to know more about your clinic, if you don't mind, and give us a little bit on what you're doing now and how did you end up there, other than just, by the short introduction that you gave us.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I would love to share some links too, to kind of like share a little bit more about the naturopathic and functional medicine philosophy. And there are links to find providers in your area. I'm happy to do that too. I can provide my email to help link people up. And there are so many just resources now, that weren't available before. So whether that be the whole health through the VA, even just so University of Wisconsin built out this whole platform that has so many resources to get someone started in the right direction. And they can even bring into their provider to like talk to, say, hey, like this resonates with me. I want to be better. I want to be, congruent, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, like all these aspects of my life. That's what it's focusing on. And there's just so many things we can do. So I'll definitely share those. I did go on another podcast recently called Authentic Human Outliers, which I get into a little more of the details of like how it was actually a clinical trial of fecal microbiota transplant that helped me come off of steroids and biologic drugs and medications. And we talked through a little bit more about like the difference between integrative medicine versus naturopathic medicine versus functional medicine. So I can provide that. That's by two other veterans that are hosting a cool podcast. But yeah, our clinic, I ended up here. Not every naturopathic doctor does a residency, but I value that idea of, left seat, right seat, being trained to do so. And this clinic, as I was shadowing during my 2 years of clinical time, so first 2 years of med school are more basic sciences, gross anatomy, dissecting, physiology, all that. Last 2 years get into a lot more clinical practices. And I went and shadowed all throughout the country, but specifically here in San Diego, just fell in love with this clinic. And the center here, about 30% of our patients are already TRICARE. So there's already a desire to treat military and their families. We aren't yet taking VA insurance, but we're on the cusp of being able to, through all those different services I mentioned, including acupuncture, chiropractic. But really my vision is that this clinic would be the functional medicine, naturopathic medicine center for veterans and military in San Diego. We're uniquely positioned because we're not, a lot of the really good like holistic clinics are further in like North County, San Diego, like on the way towards Orange County, LA. We are like right in the heart. We're right in downtown. We're just across the bridge from Coronado. We're 10 minutes up the street from where all the ships are in 32nd Street. So I ended up here because I saw that this clinic had a desire to take insurance. Honestly, for the services that we provide, I'll just say it, it's easier to be cash-based, treat middle to upper class individuals, take cash. You don't have to go through all the loopholes and jumps, hoops and all that the insurance companies demand. But I want to be part of the change. The easier route would be to say, hey, I'm opening shop. This is what my hourly rate is. And many people will benefit from that. And I have classmates and people I look up to doing that, and they're doing great work healing people, helping people heal, I should say. But because we're insurance-based, because we're it's not always easy to work with, other providers, but it's worth it. It's that team mentality of the military, did help me, instill in me as being important. So that's how I ended up here. It's a 2-year residency. I am already seeing my own patients, but I get to bounce. I have set times to ask other providers in the clinic questions about that. I can always knock on another door. So it's a unique learning experience. It's a learning as I do process here. So that's really where I'm at. I consider myself still a student, even though I'm licensed, and I love it just because I want to be a lifetime learner, and I want to learn from not only from textbooks and conferences, but honestly, I learn just as much from my patients. I ask every patient. I ask, what's working? I never leave that out. Like, what have you tried? You'd be surprised how many doctors will give advice to a patient, like lose weight or, eat less of this. They've already tried that, or and we have to figure out, medicine is a science and an art. It's really, where should we intervene? Where should we focus on today? Not just what does this patient need with their labs. That's only one aspect of who they are. It's really looking at them from this perspective of what do they need today to put them further down their path towards healing and health. So anyway, that's a long answer, but I'm here, San Diego. We can give the link in the show notes to our clinic and the functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, all that stuff.
Yeah, that would be great. Like if you send me all that stuff, I'll make sure I'll put it in the show notes. Again, like I said, we're slowly muddling along. I have like 900 people that have listened to my podcast at some way, shape, or form, and always happy to have a great guest on like you. I mean, this is incredible. Again, it's like you are a young man doing like very, very old man things, and I say that in the kindest way possible, because there's a lot of folks that come to the conclusion that they want to do medical stuff much, much later in their career. They'll transition into a PA program or become a doctor or a lawyer or something of that nature. I think circumstance kind of started you down this road, but passion kept you on it. And I think that's a huge thing is somebody that truly cares about what they're doing is going to do it well more and a lot better than somebody that's just collecting a check. So again, I appreciate, your openness about how you guys are doing business and how things are changing for your organization. Again, I could talk to you all day, being quite honest, but I know that your time is at a premium because you are at the clinic. Wow, my country came out. I apologize for that one. But I really appreciate you coming on. This has been great. Again, anything that you want to pass on to me, just shoot it to me either via email or text message or whatever, and we'll get it in the show notes. This has been a great experience for me. And I tell people all the time, I always get something out of this. Every conversation that I have, I learn something new. And again, it goes back to your point of being a lifelong learner. That is so, so important. And that's why I do this podcast, is because I try and keep them short, under an hour, so they're quick and digestible. But I make the show notes as robust as possible so people can do their own research and kind of scale how they want to take each one of these experiences. And so,
thanks for listening to Philosophy from the Frontline with Rob Robinson. We will bring you more interesting veteran transition stories, veteran advocacy, and more information in veterans transition in general on a podcast platform near you. This is Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Thanks.